Welcome, everybody. I'm Pat Swazi. I'm the president of the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds, and I want to welcome you to the sixth webinar in our Clean Water Project series. This one about implementing clean water projects, successes and challenges. Before we get started, just a few logistics. As always, I'll ask everyone to stay muted while the speakers are speaking. We will take questions for each speaker when they're finished after the presentation, and we will take them either orally, you can raise your hand, or you can put questions and comments in the chat. Also, as you probably noticed, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel and on our website shortly. Also, we're a small group today, so I think it'd be great if everybody would be willing to put their name in the chat, introduce themselves, and indicate your affiliation, your lake association, organization, whatever, so we kind of get to know who's here. Okay. With that, I do see a few people coming on, but I think we should go ahead and get started. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Ted Sedell. He's the Riparian Lands Program Manager for the Orleans County Natural Resource Conservation District. Ted's been with the Orleans County NRCD since 2021. He leads the natural resource restoration programs around rivers, streams, wetlands, for rivers, streams, wetlands, and floodplains. So with that, Ted, you are on and you should be able to share your screen.
Great. Thank you. Um, and everybody can see the screen.
Yes, we can. Mhm.
Okay, great. Um, Thanks for that introduction. That actually saved me a bit. I'm pretty thrilled that you had all that information there, so that'll save me some time in the preamble that I had prepared. As let's see, not happening quickly. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. I'm responsible for implementing a lot of projects throughout the Menfor-Magog watershed. Everything from working with landowners like big farms, mitigating ditches, gullies. We do river cleanups. We do stream restoration, wetland restoration, culvert replacement, and riparian buffer plantings. Our projects are pretty numerous throughout the basin, and we get our funding through a variety of sources, through the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission. In some corners of the watershed, we get Lake Champlain Basin Program. And we also rely heavily on the Clean Water Service Provider Network for our funding as well. In the and when I was posed with giving this presentation, I came to the conclusion that why we have a lot of projects that we implemented, one of the things that I see that has been a barrier to getting projects implemented comes from my time sitting on basin water quality councils, and I sit on two of them, the Missisquoi Basin and the Menfor-Magog Basin. In the Menfor-Magog, I am chair. And I know some people are familiar with going through the QUIS program to get funding for clean water projects, but I wanted to spend some time talking about like what really sets you up for success as being on these boards. I've had plenty of opportunities to see projects that have get funded, and for the variety of reasons, some hiccups. And I kind of wanted to go back and in space and time to kind of set up what you need to know. With these basin water quality councils, we have voting members, alternates from representative organizations. With the Menfor-Magog, we have our conservation district. We have a local watershed association. We have implementers like the Northwood Stewardship Center, Northeast Vermont Development Association, and some land trusts. So in our case, we had Vermont River Conservancy. And of course, municipalities are represented in this. And our goal in this board, what we call the BWIC, the Basin Water Quality Council, is to review projects, suss out the details, and approve them for funding. Now, that funding ultimately is housed with the clean water service provider. In the case of the Memphremagog, that is with the Vermont Conservation Housing Board, VHCB, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Over in the Missisquoi, that's with Dean Pierce with the Northwestern Regional Planning Commission. So one thing we've noticed over time, I think we're into 3 years of funding QUISP projects. 3 components to success is really getting in early and engaging the Department of Environmental Conservation employees and watershed planners, along with the river scientists. These people already, they're the key to the funding train. Getting them in early, talking about the project from the inception is completely invaluable. The next person or next set of people you really need to be involved with, obviously, is the landowners and getting a complete buy-in. We have seen projects that have been introduced into these funding streams in a variety of, like, 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out. You haven't got a complete buy-in from the landowner. The river scientist hasn't been on site yet, but these people are critical for making these projects succeed. And this is despite all the happenstance we have with contractors, weather, climatic variations, things that can undo an implementation project in a given year. These projects become very resilient as long as you have the support of both the QUISP and the DEC, along with the landowner, because that will give you the time to get these things done. And the third component to success is giving yourself plenty of time. And we often say engage early, often, and allow for plenty of time. And that's where you get a lot of these projects off the ground very quickly. So a couple of things is being prepared. And one way we've seen things get off track a little bit is just the pre-planning. People have brought forth a project and it hasn't really hit the ground because there were already projects overlaid on top of that. So we go through a screening process. This is one of these important components. This is also something you're going to learn from DEC, is to make sure you get a project database number, you have the concept, you've already been through the landowner, and now you're trying to get funding for the implementation, whether you're either going for design money all the way up through implementation. It's really important to have a clear view of what's out there already on the landscape and what opportunities are out there. The other thing that we have come across that have derailed projects is not spending enough time with the phosphorus calculator. I know on the west side of the state, there's the functioning floodplain tool, which does a calculation. Out in the Memphremagog, we're still stuck with the interim phosphorus reduction calculator tool, which is now in its 1.1 version. But this is the one that really our watershed planner at DEC is going to look at these with a fine-tooth comb. Different project types have different dollar thresholds. So one thing that on a BWIC council, what we're looking for is these estimated cost effectiveness, the $8 per kilogram per year. A lot of projects we see try to maintain under this. A helpful hint, when you're doing a large scale stream project, one of the most important drivers in this is actually the forested riparian buffer. This action type has the best efficiency and cost effectiveness. The one that has the least amount is in the like culvert removals or some barrier removals. Those, if you have a big complex project, all these interact together. And one of the hard things about this is, as you're getting into design, is projecting out how much is this construction going to cost. And this seems to be a struggling point for a lot of sponsors that want to get in and get a project off the ground. But we do encourage people to really spend time with DC, especially the Rivers Department group, in getting a real strong grasp on how much phosphorus you're likely to reduce in this project. One of the things that after 3 years, we are starting to come up. Let me back up a little bit. In 3 years, we kind of had this, because so few projects were coming through. It seemed like we had infinite amount of dollars available to us and we could fund any project. 3 to 4 years in now, we're realizing we have a finite amount of dollars and we're now having to prioritize all these applications coming in and make sure that there is enough money, one, for all these projects, but now we're ranking these by cost efficiency. Some have different thresholds. So for like stream floodplain work, we are looking at, $33,000 per kilogram per year. For a stormwater project where it's an infrastructure project that includes some of the roads, that's going to be a higher dollar amount. And finally, one thing that has always been a bit of a hiccup is landowner support. And one of the documents that DC and the clean water service providers want is a site access agreements and an operations and maintenance plan. This should be the first thing you put in front of your landowner as you're discussing your project. One thing that has happened is the landowner will be very gung-ho about wanting to get a project done, but once they see the details of the operation maintenance plan and the site access agreement, they start to, we have to kind of talk them off a cliff a little bit, because this guarantees access for both DC personnel, the service provider, any of the sponsors that are trying to get money, so representatives, any of the groups. We need access to these, and these plans are for the lifetime of the project, usually 10 to 15 years. There's not a lot of lawyerese in this document. It's actually pretty easy to read, but you can imagine a landowner getting a little ruffled when you're saying, and everybody's going to be coming to visit you. It's one thing we really want to make sure that's really clear to our landowners is, yes, we're going to be doing this work. Yes, you want the work done. Here's kind of the bargain we need to make. And we spend a lot of time going through making sure our landowners are out there with every site visit. We are the map on the beside this license agreement shows the lay of the land. We try to make sure that our landowners have all the available information as we get it, as things change or as designs change, as we move through the design to get to implementation. As long as they are fully aware. Usually these processes go pretty smoothly. And this is a couple of I just take a couple of case studies here to talk about the differences in how landowners and DC have been involved. This is the Grandview Farm in Westmore. In the center there's a pond. It doesn't look impressive, but in the 23 storm, this pond nearly breached as there's a tributary coming, old discontinued tributary that comes through, overblew this. It's a great phosphorus reduction project because we'll be expanding the riparian zone. We'll be removing this dam that's earthened and actually ready to fail. The head height on that dam's about 33 feet. If that had blown out and gone all the way down, it would have taken out the clerk's office in Westmore on Lake Willoughby. Thus, in this case, the landowner is 100% involved and really wanting to make sure that this gets successful. So we have Liz come out every time we're out there. Anything that changes in the design, and this is actually coming up for implementation here for the summer of 2026. So very excited about this one. Another project we had in southern Orleans County over in the Lamoille Basin in Greensboro, Caspian Lake. This is the Barr family property. And this is one that has gone through many iterations. Because the Barr family is in a trust, there are now multiple landowners that we have to talk with. So this has gone through several iterations of design. Every time we think we get to 100% design and ready for implementation, some aspect of this project comes back from the family having questions about the view shed, what they can do with the land. And this is a tricky one because there are 5 members of the family across the entire U.S. and also on the other side of the Atlantic that have opinions about how this project is going to go. So the footprint of this project has changed quite a bit from start to finish. It takes a lot of hand-holding and it has blown through deadlines because of these hiccups. But again, these are the kind of things that help an implementation, a project get to final implementation. And I think I wanted to share some resources. This first link is the DEC's QUIS Clean Water Applicant Recipient Resources. This has all the information you're ever going to need. This has the list of how to start filing for the grant, how to start looking at your phosphorus reduction, all the way down to applying and getting final reporting. The next 2 links here are one for the Northwest Regional Planning Commission and then the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. And these are both the service providers for the QUIS programs. And finally, I can take a lot of questions. I wasn't sure how to kind of frame this. I just wanted to lead into all these other implementation projects. There's probably a lot more interesting ones coming online, but I think this is a good preamble to the rest of what the talks you're going to have.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted, so much. So questions, just speak up or raise your hand if you have a question. Are there any questions in the chat?
No questions in the chat.
Okay. So I think that whole idea of working with the landowners is interesting and challenging. And it seems like each project depends on who the landowners are, as you described. The group that you have to work with on this one, the family trust has to be really complicated. I wonder, do you have any particular advice on sort of how to approach landowners that you feel have been really successful?
Oh, it no one technique works. I've worked with large farms where they're like, oh, this is out in the back 40. Yeah, sure, go for it. Do great things. Or that same farm, depending on where it is, it's in a very visible area, is a lot more cautious.
Mhm.
But it's just making sure, these are voluntary projects. These aren't
Right.
regulatory. So really having the landowner buy-in is really key. And it's also being flexible enough. And with that Caspian Lake one, is really just having that they're going to have a point of view. So you go back to these final designs and you try to change and tweak those designs that will meet their needs.
Mhm.
Uh, you're not going to please on a situation like that. It's really hard to please 100% of the people.
Yeah.
What you have to do is really say, this is a worthwhile investment of your land. We're
Mhm.
providing the time, the energy, the money. We just need your blessing to get this through
Mhm.
because the benefits of this are incalculable. We're reducing phosphorus and we're healing these streams and rivers at the same time, usually with multiple purposes in mind. So it runs the gamut. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think for me, I've been through this is like third going into the fourth year. I made a lot of mistakes in the first couple of years through this. So this is how I've learned trial by fire and getting to know what works, what doesn't, and what's setting yourself up for success.
Mhm. So experience is important.
It
I think
really
there is,
is.
yeah, there is, I think there is something in the chat, Jackie. There's a question there, I think. Can you see it?
Yeah. Oh, is our organization available to assist with paperwork and advice? We do, depending on where we are and where we can assist. Usually, we work in tandem, like in the Memphremagog. We have the benefit of really tight partners with the Memphremagog Watershed Association, with the Northwoods Stewardship Center. We're all collaborating together, so we often spend time working together to make sure we can get these things. But I'm wondering if the question that's being asked here is like, am I available to help assist with paperwork? And I can. The other great people that are really good at this are the actual clean water service providers. So, like Dean Pierce with the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, he's also in the Lamoille and in the Missisquoi, and then Rebecca. Her last name isn't coming to mind, but with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
So,
Thank you,
yeah,
Rebecca Williams.
re reaching out is to
Ah,
ask for help, right? Is
yes, and
important.
the question is from Shadow Lake and Glover. And great question. Yes, we do have staff that are working on the Lake Watershed Action Plan, like Will Marier. He is the one that is spearheading that, and he's with the Orleans County Conservation District.
And I think Will is on this call. He's here
Yes.
with us. So, um, um, are there other questions?
No, no.
Um, so I do have a question about maintenance on these projects.
Yes.
So you talked about the agreement that landowners you want to talk with landowners about that, and I assume they have to sign it. So is the maintenance usually on the landowner, or is the maintenance on the organization, the association, or whoever's sort of leading this?
We prefer to have buy-in. We really encourage the landowner to do the operations and maintenance in the long run. And sometimes it can be as uh, for them, it's more like, don't cut down the trees that we planted for the next 20 years. Don't go haying that field that we clearly marked off and delineated a 50-foot buffer for it. So their operation and maintenance plan is really, what they shouldn't do to affect what we've done. Likewise, we are also now the clean water service providers are opening the door to a multi-phase implementation and operations and maintenance. So the service provider can get credit once we finish a project. There's that phosphorus reduction is calculated, the project's done, we can get up to a year of funding more to 10 trees to go and monitor for another year. Which is something that wasn't the case in a lot of these grants, whether it was Trees for Streams, these QUISP programs, or anything else. Post-implementation monitoring and maintenance was really on the onus of the landowner. But everybody's realizing that for success, we need to be, especially for a lot of tree plantings, you need to get out there and weed whack, whether it's weed whacking or tending herbicide to keep down invasives, and watering too, because we're oscillating between too much water one year, not enough water the next year. And so to really increase the success of these projects, the sponsor is really taking it upon themselves, at least for the first year, to make sure things are going swimmingly. What we're asking the landowner is really just don't undo what we did. And if you see something happening, please contact us.
That's excellent. I think almost time. Do we have one more minute?
Yeah, I think that we should move to Brett,
on?
but that's so much great information. Thank you,
I know.
Ted.
I haven't run out of questions yet, but maybe at the end I can ask some more questions.
Yeah.
But thank you, Ted. That was really, really interesting. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So we will move on. And our next speaker is Brett Towle. Brett founded Dicot Land Studio in 2022 to embrace an integrated approach to ecological design. Brett holds degrees in ecological design and planning and in environmental design and green building. So welcome, Brett.
Thank
happy
you.
to have you here, and you should be able to share your screen if you'd like.
Awesome. Can everyone see that okay?
There we go. Yes, it's good.
Great. So thanks for having me, and thanks for the intro as well. Yeah, today, I think will be a nice balance in presentations, because really what I'm going to be talking about is, rather than kind of the larger scale clean water projects, kind of a peek behind the curtain on what it's like to implement these smaller scale best management practices for rain gardens, bioswales, natural erosion control, and vegetative buffers. I wear a lot of other hats in my company, but for the sake of this presentation, I kind of want to talk about experience on the ground, just building these, and even with small projects, kind of at the residential site scale. There's a lot to consider and a lot of surprises and things that can happen. So I really want to kind of start with thinking about, you have your design, what's next to get to that project success at the end. And I want to talk about a little bit about building your project team, setting and managing expectations and coordinating the work, and then the execution, which I see as kind of planning and pre-construction, site work, planting, and then the care for these systems as well. And I think a similar, theme you'll find in both Ted's talk, but also, a lot of this whole process is plan early and often, and trust your team and actually ask for help when you can, and have a clear strategy, both on the planning side, but also for the implementation and, once you actually mobilize equipment and materials. And the first step in kind of building your project team I see is who's steering the ship. I think it's really important to have someone who's responsible for the success of the project at large. If you've got a design, is your designer going to be the one kind of keeping the vision? Is it going to be the contractor that you've hired to complete the project? Or is it going to be you as a lake organization that's kind of doing it yourself? And I see kind of three main elements to these projects being site work, landscaping, and stewardship or garden care. And I think it's just really important because any sort of siloed decision making and uncertainty in roles throughout these projects will cause problems. So what are those roles? Like I said, I'm mostly talking about kind of rain gardens and small scale projects here. Like I said, site work, planting, and then the garden care. I've heard a lot of people say in Vermont that it can be a challenge to find a landscaper or a contractor for work. There's some really good lists out there, like the Blue Stormwater Program has a contractors list that they've been developing that I think is great. And then the Natural Shoreland through Vermont DEC also has a certification list to check out. But in Vermont, I think it's important to ask your neighbors. Word of mouth can go a really long way. And then once again, like plan early, because I think it's difficult to find contractors sometimes because we reach out in the spring for a project that has a deadline in June. If you give them plenty of advance notice, that working relationship is going to be so much better. The communication lines are going to be better, and they're just going to be much more willing to work as a team. Who are you going to choose once you've got some people on the phone? I like to set up a bid meeting, and I'm kind of coming at this from both being a designer who has held bid meetings and managed projects, but then also as the contractor who has been handed a design and built these and, been the one bidding on them. So I think it's really important to consider like what part of the project are they actually taking on. Not all landscapers are going to do excavation. Most excavators aren't going to do landscaping. If you can find one that does it all, that's awesome. And then kind of have a gut check in these bid meetings with, what questions did they ask? How engaged were they? What is your gut instinct for what a working relationship with them is going to be like? And then when can they schedule and how much will it cost? I think a big lesson for me is don't always pick the cheapest option. I usually let, my customers or clients select at the end of the day who they want to work with, but really assess their proposal, their experience, and their level of engagement. Once you've hired a contractor, it's important to set some expectations and be really clear and redundant about the outcomes that you're looking for. Not all designs are created equal. So, how detailed was that design, and is there work ahead of the contractor coming onto the site that, do some of those details need to be flushed out more? And then thinking about that work sequencing, get the hard materials on site, before you get the plants, and just thinking about if you're working with multiple contractors, getting everyone on the same page to sequence that work appropriately. And then I think a really big lesson I've had is to like build a relationship with the people doing the work, and trust their experience, because I consider myself a generalist, and a big part of how I've been successful in some of these projects is by communicating and knowing when I don't know things. And a good example of that is a property I've worked on in Virgins, which, as you can see, is surrounded by three sides by Lake Champlain. And this customer is really awesome, and they wanted to actually just renovate this historic early 1800s home, and needed to go through the permitting process to show that they're managing their stormwater with best management practices. It was a really constrained site, and only through working very closely with the site work, an excavator that I had hired, to ask him, hey, what would you do here? Like, is it possible to catch all the stormwater coming from this roof and send it away, not towards the lake, and hold it on site? And it's a pretty interesting location. And he helped me kind of figure out a way to really subtly bring a swale around the house that you can barely notice and drain it into kind of a sediment catch basin before it settles and moves into a greater garden area. And I think the important thing here is like we can make this infrastructure beautiful. And through really relying on the contractor that I was working with, we were able to kind of put our two skill sets together and create an area that is both beautiful and functional and, acting as a clean water project. Kind of on the other side of setting expectations with your contractors, I think it's important to manage expectations with the landowners. Make sure that the landowners are aware that there are going to be some eggs cracked and that this is a process. It is a construction site after all, once you bring an excavator onto it. And just make sure that site repair is considered in these proposals with the contractor you're working with. I also love to just keep those lines of communication open really clearly. This is an email I've sent to a client of mine who we were getting started on a project in a week or so, and I kind of just went through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, next week. This is roughly what you can expect, and here are some other things that will help the project go more smoothly. I think this kind of communication between parties is critical in a successful project. Moving towards thinking about actually building one of these projects or implementing them, I'm going to kind of frame the execution of these rain garden projects with a project I worked on at the Shelburne Town Beach, where my team was hired for the plantings around this new beach house, and also the final design and construction of a rain garden on the water side of this new building here. Before you even start, have that pre-construction meeting, get the landowner involved. In this case, it was the town of Shelburne. Have the contractors on site, have the designer there if you can, and make sure that there's a clear plan for the day you start mobilizing. I like to get over to these sites before anything is mobilized and set up my erosion and sediment control. So that's your silt fence or any wattles that might be necessary, and think about where you're going to be storing and staging material and equipment. And then call in DigSafe, flagging any infrastructure or trees that you might want to protect around their critical root zone. Get on this early before anyone's mobilized. This project had a lot of challenges. And first, the hole was actually already dug before we were hired by a previous site work contractor. So that kind of just gets into this siloed decision making again. This was a bit of a surprise to me. The budget was really tight on this project. We only had $10,000 at the end of a large capital improvement project. The siting was questionable, very close to a seawall. I wouldn't have put the garden here. It was also quite steep. There were a lot of flatter areas. And it was undersized for the drainage area. So I actually had to massage the plan a little bit and come up with the final design that used small boulders, 2 feet by 2 feet, to create kind of a series of infiltration step pools with simple but rich plantings. And we decided to rent a small excavator to kind of reshape this area and really prepare our soils and our base for any other materials, and kind of give it a little bit more of an organic feel. So when it comes to implementation, the actual site work, shoot for a weather window, but know that things are going to get thrown off. I love the mid-May to mid-June and mid-September to mid-October window. But oftentimes, you're kind of, with that, you're avoiding the wet shoulder seasons and the really hot summers. But best laid plans. Try to be delicate with the site as best as you can. And really, it sounds silly, but like, don't make things worse. Make them better and try to do no harm. I think if that's your mindset going into things, you can have success just in that. So here at the Shelburne Town Beach, a big challenge we ran into is the boulders that were delivered were twice the size of the ones I had planned for. So our excavator was grossly undersized, and we had to make more of a mess than we intended, like dragging around these big boulders with a small excavator with really no room in the budget to bring in a different one. We also got 5 inches of rainfall in the July storms of 2024. So we ended up working in a mud bath in a pretty public area, and I had to make the executive decision to hold off for a couple weeks while this dried out because there's really no working in this. We were only going to get ourselves into more trouble. So we kind of had to change plans. And I think it's important to mention too that these designs are never going to perfectly match the site conditions, and you can't plan for everything. Here in this photo, once we returned to the site and we're working on our our drainage rock, we ended up digging up a historic seawall that was not listed on any engineering or architectural plans. Even people who had worked at the beach for 50 years had never seen this. It turned out to be at least 5 feet deep, about 3 feet wide, and who knows how long this ran across the beach. It was right in the middle of where we wanted to infiltrate water. So we had to kind of adapt here and be creative, extend the garden further, and just incorporate it into the design. That thing wasn't going anywhere. And we were able to kind of get our soil media back in place. And planting, I think, is where these projects really come to life. I think that, having more plants is better. Obviously have a good plan, but think about, more plants covering the ground, more biomass, more filtration, and more slowing of that water. And I think it's really important to not skimp in this phase because this is what brings it all together. Make it diverse, make it rich, and make it beautiful. I try to work with a matrix style planting approach that uses a ground layer, a lower layer, and an upper layer planted closer together than you would think, to really cover that ground and ideally not have to mulch after the first year. And then I try to limit compost, and I don't apply it to the whole garden in these scenarios, and spot amend with bags in the holes themselves if necessary.
I think Brett might have frozen there. Seem to have lost him for a few minutes. Maybe if there's questions, people could put them in the chat, and when we get Brett back, he can answer those questions. Is there anything in the chat, Jackie?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Yep.
Whoops, did we
Is he
lose him
back?
completely? No, I don't think so. I'm afraid we might have lost him altogether.
Or he'll come back on if he
Well,
rebooted.
yeah, it might have been to reboot. So, does anybody have any comments or any thoughts? We'll wait maybe 1 minute, see if he can get back on. If not, we'll move on, and then if he gets back on later, we can come back to him. I'm just going to take a look and see if I see him coming back on.
Yeah,
Some more specifics on Matrix.
I had a comment, and one that's really pertinent is these projects, there's always something underneath the ground that will cause a hiccup. We just had a culvert replacement over in Westfield along a trib to the Missisquoi, and we came across ledge, bedrock, right where we wanted to put culvert. Or replacing the culvert, and the plan said to dig 6 feet down for the footers and stem wall. Well, we could only get 3 feet down and had to tie the stem wall into the bedrock, but at the expense of 25 yards of rock hammering of Yeah, it's a real thing. I chuckled when I saw this big slab of concrete.
Yeah.
Can everyone see my screen again here?
We
So I'm not
can.
sure what happened. I
Yeah.
just got booted
Yeah.
out somehow. Sorry about
That
that.
happens. It's
Um,
technology.
but here looking at kind of the, once we finish planting, you can see one of my employees who was kind of proudly
Yep.
looking at the garden after kind of a long haul and a messy project. But really more than anything, I think the success comes in stewardship of these systems. Ted mentioned, someone asked a question about maintenance of these larger scale stream projects. Maintenance of these smaller scale projects is really important too. And I actually don't think it is a crazy time input. They're living in dynamic systems. And I think we need to anticipate that these things are going to change and we're going to have to make edits, additions, subtractions, moving plants around, rethinking things. But I think with a little bit of like strategic seasonal cleanups, some basic summer weeding, editing, and what I like to call the Chelsea chop here, which you can see in the lower bottom, where some leggier perennials that get wily, you give them a cut back through half in May, they're going to bush out and look really nice. And then cleaning out kind of sediment litter, things like that. I've done this almost for free because I live down the road, and I think I've maybe spent less than an hour total caring for this over the whole season of last year. And here it is in July of 2025, buzzing with pollinators and flowers blooming throughout the seasons, and just kind of something really a nice addition to the Shelburne Beach there. And we're going to get signs up there too, so people kind of know what's going on with this being a clean water project. So I just want to leave you with a few truths that I think about as I'm doing these. Water always wins. Be redundant. Don't don't keep that in your head at all times. Plan, dig, but then adapt. And success is going to come through the stewardship and care of these things. Thank you.
Great. This is great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brett. I think there's a question, Jackie, in the chat.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think I saw something pop up.
Yep. It says more specifics on matrix planting. It said, do you recommend only native plants with deeper roots, or it is okay to mix in garden perennials like hostas?
So I'm not a native plant purist. I feel like I use mostly native plants in my work. But I think that at the end of the day, gardens are a human creation. And, if hostas are going to be the right plant for the sun and shade, and something that you want to look at, then I say plant your hostas. I do like to focus on, with those matrix plantings, having those deep-rooted plants though. So, it's not this or it's yes and so really, have a plan for your native grasses that are really going to deeply root in, some of the flowering perennials that'll do that as well. But at the end of the day, this is your garden. So I'll never put an invasive plant in here, and I'm familiar with a number of plants that maybe aren't considered invasive yet, but I know are maybe bullies and going to kind of take over a garden. So I avoid certain plants, but in the situation of a hosta, yes.
Other questions? I know we're starting to get near time for the next speaker, but are there other questions? One more question. Okay, thank you, Brett. This was really interesting. Thank you. Really super helpful too. Very much appreciated. So we're going to move on to our last speaker. This is someone many of you know, Dave Johnson, who's member of the FOVLAP board. Dave is a retired scientist with an interest in preserving Vermont's lakes, in addition to his work on the FOVLAP board, and he is, by the way, the board treasurer. He serves as water quality chair for the Lake Dunmore Fern Lake Association. In this role, he has used public funding to implement several clean water projects around Dunmore and Fern Lake. So thank you, Dave, for doing this presentation.
Yes, thank you, Pat. So I'll be describing some projects that my Lake Association, the Lake Dunmore Fern Lake Association, have done in the last few years. We created a watershed action plan in 2021, and the association represents both lakes. Fern Lake, you see on the far left, which is 80 acres, and then Lake Dunmore is about 1,000 acres. Okay. So this is a map of the two lakes. In the white rectangles, you can see the large number of projects that are consultant Fitzgerald Environmental identified in our watershed action plan. And in the colored circles, you can see a number of projects that the ones in green have been completed. The ones in red and orange are sort of in process. And the ones in the lavender color are projects that we embarked on, but we decided to drop because the property owners did not want to move forward. So I just want this, a lot of this has been covered in the previous talks, but the implementation phase of a project involves a lot of different steps. And, Ted said a lot about the access license agreement. I'll be saying more about that. There's contractor selection and scheduling. A lot of the permitting involved in watershed action plan projects involve constraints on when you can actually do the work. There's oversight. We asked our consultant to oversee the construction project and sort of sign off when he feels that the project has met the design criteria. We've had some cost and schedule overruns and had to discuss this with our funders. And then keep in mind there are deliverables other than the project itself that the funders require, like photos and signage and a final report. And you should count on having to deal with some complaints from property owners. And as has been mentioned, maintenance is a very important part of this and has its own challenges. Okay. So the first couple of projects that we did with in this plan were both on public property. This is one at a boat launch where prior to the project, stormwater would just run down this sloped parking lot right into the lake, and you could see evidence of this in the lake bottom. So the project involved regrading this parking lot and directing the water in stone lined trenches to bioretention areas on either side. And in this project, the contractor selection and the construction went smoothly. We had good cooperation with Vermont Fish and Wildlife, who own this property. The association agreed to take on watering of the plantings as the part of the maintenance. And we added this to our greeter duties, which they did very well in that first year. But later in the season, when there was more growth and some of the grasses and weeds started growing up, a maintenance contractor for Fish and Wildlife decided he wanted to weed whack both of these areas. And so we lost a lot of our plantings because of that. And we had to replant about a third of our plantings the following spring. Since then, I think we've communicated better with Fish and Wildlife, and we haven't had that problem. The next project is also on public property. It's at the Branbury State Park, and here a part of the shoreline was being undercut from wind-driven wave erosion. And so we put in some core logs to stabilize the shoreline. And another part of the property was seeing seasonal erosion, especially during snowmelt, where they had to come and fill a eroding gully every other year to keep it looking good. So we addressed both of these problem areas, and it's been working well since then. But a couple of things happened in this implementation that I wanted to highlight. Shortly after we completed the final design, we learned that the Vermont Department of Historical Preservation was requiring an archaeological survey of the area, and this increased the project cost and caused a 6-month delay. While they did this, they didn't find this. They were thinking that maybe this was a site of Native American campsite or something, but they did a lot of samples. They didn't find anything. So once we got the permit, we first had to go to our funder to ask for a contract extension and for a budget increase, which they were happy to do. But the delays did result in a compressed fall construction time window. And so when we actually put out the project to bid, we only got one bidder which was a very high bid. And so we decided to wait until the following spring when we rebid the project and got multiple bids, which were much lower. But I just wanted to say that, as others have said, some of these projects can take quite a long time to get through all these hurdles, and this one took about 2.5 years. This is not really a stormwater project, but it was an interesting part of our watershed action plan was to do an assessment of the main tributary to Lake Dunmore. And this had two components. One was to do a geomorphic assessment of the stream, where an expert basically walks the stream and looks at maps, elevation maps, and so on, to try and identify where there may be unstable parts of the stream shore. And he identifies those and suggests possible mitigation. The other part was to actually monitor the phosphorus coming down the stream, and that's the monitoring part. For the assessment aspect, we went out for bids for that, and the low bidder actually raised his bid after we had selected him, but prior to contract execution, and we decided that we would have to do a second bid cycle to make it fair. So which we did, but this led to some delays. Also for the monitoring, the landowner where we had the monitoring equipment located was concerned about his liability if injuries occurred during installation or maintenance. And we had to hire a lawyer to assure the landowner that he was protected, since state law says that if the work is related to conservation, he doesn't have that liability. The landowner also stipulated that he needed to provide permission for every access or for installation or maintenance, and this was an inconvenience that we accepted and have reluctantly lived with. Okay. This is the project on Fern Lake, which we completed last spring. It's on a steep section of dirt road, and you can see in the upper right how stormwater has eroded gullies in the roadbed. And this wouldn't be so bad, except that after leaving the roadbed or at the bottom of this hill, there's a stream that flows, 100 feet later into the lake. And so sediment, the nutrients from this eroding road were getting into the lake. And in this case, we spent a lot of time getting sign off on the access license agreement. There were several landowners, 3 different plots or parcels along this stretch of road. And one of them was the owner was an estate that was in the process of selling that parcel. And so we had to wait for that transaction to take place. And we basically spent a year waiting to get sign off on this project. And once we got sign off, procuring a contractor and getting the work done went fairly smoothly. But upon completion, one of the property owners complained that all of a sudden he was getting water in his garage. And we immediately brought the consultant in the next day and determined that instead of our project, or I should say, it wasn't clear that it was our project that was doing this, because his well was actually overflowing due to a raised water table from the wet spring we had last year. And that was creating a pool of water just outside his garage. So we think that was the main reason that his garage was getting flooded. But, this is just another example of surprises that can happen. Another interesting impact of this project was that the contractor who was doing the maintenance for years and was on the bidders list of people who asked to bid on the project did not bid, but then after the work was done, refused to continue his maintenance contract. So the people who lived along the road had to find a new maintenance contractor. This was actually, this stream flows into Lake Dunmore and was the highest priority project in our watershed action plan. But, and so we started actually working on it like in 2022, but it still isn't completed. And so where were the delays here? Most of it came from dealing with the landowners. There were 2 landowners, and one of them was again a trust with 3 generations of people, all of whom had different ideas about the design. And even though both landowners, or the landowners on either side, saw clear evidence that they were losing shoreline, and supported the project, they couldn't decide on how, for the longest time, on whether they agreed with the design. Initially, the design had a lot of trees that they worried would block their views, and yes, it would block some of their view of the lake. But we gradually modified the design, the footprint, and the plantings to sort of reach a compromise with them on, between erosion prevention and views of the lake. And I think this is likely to be an issue that comes up on a lot of the lakeshore projects moving forward with watershed action plan projects.
Right, Dave, to interrupt, we're almost at 1:05.
Oh, okay. So this is my final slide. What lessons have we learned from this? Even though property owners are initially supportive getting agreement on the final design and sign off has caused delays for our projects that are on private property, sometimes very long delays. For all three of the completed stormwater projects, construction took place in the spring, even though on two of these projects, the initial bids were in late summer and the initial construction windows were in the fall. And so, you know, this is a lesson that if you want to do work in the fall, you need to get those bids out in midsummer or sooner. And finally, our lake association is involved in maintenance of these projects, and through our experience, we would say that you have to be vigilant in terms of frequent inspection, and you have to work with the landowners with good communication channels in order to make this a success. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. That was really interesting to see those projects and the different projects and the different issues around them. Are there questions or comments? I'd certainly have sort of a comment, which is, as Dave pointed out, and as you've heard from our other speakers, you know, time is really important. My Lake Association has worked on a project that was finally completed this summer that took somewhere between 6 and 7 years from initial design to final completion, with funding ups and downs about funding, and you know, so these things can really take a long time. And as Dave pointed out, this last project he talked about has taken many years to complete. So I think that's something to think about, especially for lake associations, where you might have volunteers moving in and out, and you have to kind of plan to stick with it over a long period of time and make sure you've got people who can manage that. So I guess it's just a comment. Other questions or comments? Other thoughts about this? Okay. Hearing none, I'd like to thank our speakers. Thank you, Ted and Brett and Dave, for doing this. I think this has been really interesting, really helpful, laying out what you need to think about, and sort of getting that organized is really important. I think, as you've all pointed out, the landowner piece, when it has to be on private land, is a huge issue. And, you know, being prepared for that, I think, is really important. So thank you for that. And we will continue discussion of many of these issues in the coming year. I also would like to, you know, I have to put in a little plug for FOVLAP itself, and for, you know, considering joining as a member and supporting FOVLAP, because that enables us to bring you these things. Coming up, save the date. We have two webinars already scheduled. January 29th, discussion of the Model My Watershed application. And Dave is actually going to lead that one again and explain how to use that. We also have one coming up February 17th on Phragmites control. That's one that's been requested over a number of times to talk about Phragmites. And then we have a set of topics. We haven't to be determined in terms of date, but we'll be looking at nutrient pollution, dirt road projects, shoreline projects, and stream and forest projects, all coming up in winter and spring. And then kicking off the summer will be our annual lake seminar, and that's always the first Friday of June. And the annual lake seminar will be a hybrid meeting. And again, we'll be putting out more information about that. So I hope to see you there at our new upcoming webinars. And with that, I will thank you all again for joining us, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.